Alright, so here is the latest acquisition, Revolution X, and it's in pretty darn good shape. We'll go over what's all wrong with it in a moment. It's currently not able to be turned on, but I'll explain that shortly. The control panel overlay has seen much better days. Someone spilled what looks like a whole entire soda under here. It's pretty bad, but I should be able to make it look fairly decent. The Lexan is going to have to either be reproduced or gotten rid of because somebody was kind enough to scrape the ever-loving crap out of all the faces of the band members except for the drummer, the poor drummer. So that's going to have to go away. No one currently reproduces the Lexan for these games, so I may just get rid of it completely and just leave the CPO exposed. It should be laminated, but I'm not sure. We'll find out. The front is in good shape. I got to, of course, remove the lockdown bar, but not a big deal. So we're going to take the lockdown bar out and put the bolts back in and kind of touch everything up. So it should clean up quite nicely. Otherwise, yeah, not too bad. It's got the topper, and the marquee is in great shape. Not broken or cracked or anything. It's even, I took it out to take the topper off when I transported the game, and it's not even burned at all. It's basically brand new. A little bit of damage here, but I can get rid of that, not a big deal. So yeah, the marquee is good, and here's this side. It's a little bit better than the other side. There's a couple scratches, you know. Scratch right there, but nothing a little fine tip Sharpie wouldn't be able to take care of, so no big deal there. There's not really much damage to it. The only real damaged area is right here and right here, but I can touch that up fairly easily. Otherwise, it's not bad. It's not faded. It's in pretty darn good shape. So, cosmetically, I'd say it's probably about a 7.5 out of 10. Still pretty good. But the inside's a different story. This cabinet has, well, not the cabinet, the monitor, I'm sorry, the monitor has seen much better days. I think it was actually in a fire. Somebody used the original monitor that was in here was a Hanorex Polo, and somebody took it out and put a K7000 in, but I think the K7000 they put in here was from a fire because the whole frame is basically covered in soot and it's black, and the rails and everything are all black, you can see in here, and the neck board is dark and the chassis is dark, and you can see the discoloration on the remote board here, and you can see the wires here are kind of burnt. Not really burnt, but they're damaged as well. So I think this actually spent some time in, you can see there just how soot covered. I think this monitor was in a machine that was in a fire. And you can see how dark and beat up the actual tube is. I think, let me see if I can just kind of, yeah, it's just sooted up. Even the, you know, the anode cable should be red, but it's black from the soot. I think, you know, you can see here clearly that it's, I think this was in a fire. And it's got the Hanorex Polo red connector here that somebody jumpered the sync over to the right pin. So I think this spent some time in a fire, and it's going to have to come out. It's definitely going to be rebuilt and rejuvenated and cleaned. So I have another monitor we're going to drop in here just so we can do some testing. But the cabinet was missing both of the main fuses. The 4 amp fuse here and the 1 amp fuse here were missing from the power brick. So I got some fuses to replace those with. And you can see the back door had the lock busted off, and the key's actually even still in it. I'm not sure why it's busted off even though the key's in it, but that's one thing. There's no power supply. Someone yanked that out. So we have missing fuses, no power supply, a burned up monitor. But the good news is the PCB appears to be in good shape. The problem with these is that these little capacitors, these little surface mount capacitors, you know, they're what is that, C96 and C98 there, and C99 right there. These little surface mount capacitors will go bad and leak all over the board and cause all kinds of problems. But I inspected this and they all look really good. I don't see any that are leaking or broken or missing or anything like that. So I think we're going to be good to go. I'm going to actually install a power supply in here. I'm going to disconnect all the connectors and install a power supply and set our voltage to the proper level. And then we're going to go ahead and get another monitor and just have it set aside here on the ground and hook it up. And we're going to turn it on and see if we actually have a working machine. So I'm going to take this monitor out and replace it with a known good, clean, repaired, ready to go one from my stock. And then we're going to take this one and we're going to repair and clean and rejuvenate it at a later time to replace the one I'm putting in here as a replacement. So just basically swapping them out, and we'll take care of cleaning this one up later. But I want to get that power supply installed, get those fuses installed, and check my voltages and make sure we actually get a good image and make sure this powers up. The soundboard appears to have some, not necessarily damage, but the connectors seems like it's seen some heat. I don't know if that's heat damage or something got spilled. Because if you look in the heatsink area there on the soundboard, there's something spilled there. I don't know if that's part of the liquid damage from whatever got spilled on the control panel. It very well may be, because you can see on the chips here, we got something similar going on. If I can get some light in here, yeah, see, someone has spilled something on this soundboard, and it's right, see, you can look there, see, it's all spilled down this soundboard. So I'm going to actually try and power this up without the soundboard installed. I'm going to take it out and inspect it, and then if everything goes the way I hope it does, I'll clean all this up and then we'll test it again and see if the sound works. Now there's a secondary connector right, let's see if I can pull this out here more. There, yeah, there's a secondary connector right here that runs, I think it's 15 volts AC, and there's a little bridge rectifier right there next to the fuse. It's right there. You can see the AC plus and minus. So this soundboard, unlike Mortal Kombat 2 or MK1 or any of the other Midway games, requires 15 volts AC, and that's what that little connector does. So you're not going to be able to test this on a bench if you ever had this board set without a 15 volt AC reference, and that comes from the power supply here, the power brick. So this is I got a fly that won't leave me alone, sorry. This power brick is special to Revolution X because it supplies a 15 volt AC signal to run off for the soundboard. There's also the gun PCB here as well. So everything is here and complete. I'm going to do what I need to do here real quick off camera. I'll get the power supply installed. I'll get it set for what it needs to be set to. I'll get the fuses installed. I'll get the spare monitor set up here so we can plug it in. I'll disconnect the soundboard and get our voltages tested. I think I may have said that. But I'll get everything ready to go so we can turn it on and see if it actually works. One last thing is the power cord here. Someone was kind enough to yank the end off of it. So I have a new plug. We're gonna lop this off and strip some new wires and get a new connector put on here. And then we'll power it up and see what it does. Hopefully it works. It should. I didn't see any damage from the caps, and I'm going to actually take all those caps off the board and replace them with electrolytic caps so we can prevent board damage for many years to come. One thing I did notice though is that just actuating switches and whatnot, the click of the micro switch from the guns, neither one of them make any kind of noise. You know, you click, click, they're both absolutely dead. Neither one of them make any noise at all. So I don't know if they work, but we're going to find out. The most important thing here is to actually make sure that the board powers up and we got a working board with no errors and no problems, because it's going to be very hard to find a replacement or get this fixed if it is damaged. And the soundboard is going to get yanked out. I'll inspect that on the bench, and assuming that it's good, I'll clean it up and bring it back out here. So I'm going to cut away, and when I come back I'll have everything ready to go to plug in and see what happens. Alright, well, it's about 22 hours later from what you just saw a few moments ago, and it's been a very hectic 22 hours, especially like I spent 5 hours last night working on this, and I'll explain what happened in a moment. But I got the power supply installed, I got all the voltages checked, everything was set and properly adjusted, and I noticed that the gun interface PCB had 4 fuses on it. There's 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. Well, the bottom 2 were a bit blackened, and I checked them and they were blown. So there were 4 fuses on the gun PCB, gun interface PCB, and the bottom 2 were blown. So we had 2 blown fuses. The 2 main cabinet fuses were gone. Focus up. I still got this camera issue. There we go. Focus. All right. So we had 2 blown fuses, 2 missing fuses, a ripped off connector, a monitor that was in a fire, and this thing was just in dire straits. So I didn't want to power up the board without making sure that everything was okay. So I actually removed the board from the machine and brought it in here on the test bench and powered it up, and it was dead. Oh, and you could have heard my sigh of disappointment from across the world, because these are notorious for having issues, and no one seems to ever be able to fix them, and no one seems to work on them. So the first step was to make sure that none of the little surface mount caps were corroded, or leaking, I should say. These things are notorious for leaking and causing damage, and acid damage and trace damage on the board, but not a single one was leaking from the initial inspection. But I went ahead and removed them anyway. Well, I got lucky with the fact that none of them were leaking. That's very fortunate. So I took them all off and put electrolytics in place. So you can see all the 50 volt 10 microfarad electrolytics that I installed in place of the surface mount caps. They're all over the place. But so we took care of that. So that's a bit of preventative maintenance to keep those from leaking in the future. But they're just, all these caps are just filter caps, and the board can run just fine without them, or a few of them being bad. They're just filter caps, but they obviously should be installed. So I put electrolytics in place of all of the surface mount ones, and I powered up the board, and it was still dead. And I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and cursed the sky and said, oh, why me, why me? But I didn't give up, and I fully inspected the board for any trace damage, any cuts, any gouges, anything on the back that might be touching. And this board had never even been removed from the machine, so I don't think anybody had damaged it or messed with it or done anything to it. And I reseated every single socketed chip. I reseated these 2 gal chips. I reseated the revision ROM. I'm sorry. The security chip, the PLCC chips. I reseated every one of the game ROMs and also checked them against the files in MAME. All of them checked good. So I went over everything with a fine-tooth comb, and when I got to these chips here, this side of the chip, of every one of these chips, all of these solder joints on this side towards the ROMs on all these chips were all kind of oxidized and brown. They weren't shiny and silvery. They were more kind of oxidized and brown and very, very dull looking. So I busted out the hot air station and reflowed all these chips. After reflowing all these chips, the board came to life, and it booted reliably. Every time I tried to boot it, it would boot. But the very first time I booted it and it came up with an image, my exuberance was very short-lived, because as soon as it checked all of the RAM and then it began checking the top row of ROMs, it kind of hung up, and then it would give me an error saying ROMs bad. It never even attempted to read these. It tried to read this row of ROMs, and it couldn't talk to the ROMs. And it said "Red ROMs bad. Press any button to continue." I hit one of the buttons on the rig here, and as soon as I did, it would reset. It would say "Loading program" on top of the screen and reset, and then it would boot up and try and check the ROMs and say "Red ROMs bad. Press any button, loading program," and reset. So it would just reset every time I tried to read the ROMs. So what was happening is the main board here was not seeing the ROMs. As far as the board was concerned, it thought the ROMs were all removed from the board. Now you can actually see, if you follow the traces, that all the traces for these chips actually run right to the ROM. So I think there's a 245 chip, 245 chip, 245 chip, 245 chip. Then there's a 374 chip, a 374 chip, and a 374 chip. So if you follow the traces, they go right to all the rows of ROMs. And knowing, let's see, I don't have my Wolf unit board, but the Wolf unit board actually has the same chips. The interface, the ROMs go through these chips, and they go through these chips to U35, and from U35 to the rest of the board. So knowing that circuitry on the Wolf unit, I realized it's probably something to do with these chips. The fact that I was able to reflow them and get the board to at least boot, I figured one or more of these chips are probably bad and not allowing the ROMs to talk to the board. So I changed out the chips one at a time. I changed this 245 chip. My camera has an autofocus problem, so if I lose focus here, in and out, I'm sorry, you have to bear with me. But I changed out this 245 chip, booted the board, and it did nothing. It still tried to read the first row and then reboot, and endless cycle. So I changed out this 245 chip, no change. I changed out this 245 chip, no change. This 245 chip, no change. I changed out this 374 chip, no change. This 374 chip, no change. This 374 chip, and as soon as I changed this chip out, success. The board booted, checked all the ROMs, and now I have a fully complete working Revolution X PCB. So the bottom line here is that usually when these boards are dead, you've got corrosion damage from the surface mount caps, but that wasn't the case here. I had oxidized solder on these chips that was causing the board to not boot or keeping it from booting at all. After reflowing the chips, I got the board to boot reliably, but then it wouldn't read the ROMs, and it wouldn't read the ROMs because this 374 chip here was bad, U40. So after reflowing these chips and replacing U40 and changing out all the surface mount caps to the electrolytics, I have a 100% operational board. So let's fire it up and I'll show you that it passes all the checks and actually is working. And then we'll get it back in the cabinet and see what we can do about that. Now the soundboard, I mentioned I had some type of spilled soda or something on it. I got that all cleaned up. So it's ready to test. I need to cap it. I don't have a cap kit on hand. But basically this is identical to the Mortal Kombat 2 soundboard. And I do have a working MK2 soundboard that I've already capped. I would have to change out, the filter cap is different. This connector is different. There's a fuse holder and a bridge rectifier. So I might be able to retrofit the MK2. I don't have one in front of me to verify, but I may have to do that if I'm able to. If this doesn't work, I'm going to try and fix it. If I can't fix it, I'll just swap it out with the working MK2 if I'm able to. I don't know if there's room for these components. There may be. I don't know offhand. I can't recall. But if that's the case, we'll get that done, assuming that this doesn't work. But so for now, let's get this on the test bench here and turn it on so you can see it in action and verify that it's working before we put it in the cabinet in case there's something wrong with the cabinet. And then we'll have to, and once this is back installed in the machine, we'll hook this back up as well and see if the sound works. Also, I'm curious to see if the gun interface PCB is operational because, like I say, those bottom two fuses were blown. And I'll show you that in more detail later. But let's get this set up and fire it up and we can see it in action. Okay, here we go. Oh, is it plugged in? Oh, I don't have my power plugged in. There we go. All right, here we go. Got our LED. And there it is. This was, I spent, I think about 4.5 hours troubleshooting this board last night. That's why I didn't get very much done on the actual machine between a few moments ago and now. It's still sitting in the same configuration it was just a few moments ago, even though it's about 24 hours later. So now you can see what it would do is it would get to this screen, it would try and check these ROMs and they'd flash like this, and then they would just go solid, and it would say ROMs, red ROMs bad, press any button, you press the buttons and it would just reset and try and check. It was just endless boot loop because it wasn't receiving the ROMs. But now as you can see they're reading the ROMs. We'll get back to this in a moment. But yeah, you can see I went through all these chips, and once I changed out U40, that was the culprit, this guy right there. So, score one for Revolution X. Alright, let's make sure this is all good. And of course it's backwards because, as we know, it uses a mirror. So that's normal. There's actually a dip switch on here to flip the screen to normal mode. If you're using a conversion cabinet of some kind, you can flip the screen to normal mode. I think it flips it up this way. Yeah, it just flips it vertically. It might do horizontally, I don't know. And time out from sound. There we go. Awesome. So now we have a working board. We had bad solder and a bad 374 chip. So let's get this all back in the cabinet and get it all set up and see if we can get this operational in the machine, and then see if we have any issues with our sound. Yeah, sorry, my camera started acting up. It turned off the autofocus, and for some reason it won't let me turn it back on. I did a full factory adjustment or factory reset on the camera, and it's still foobarred. So I'm probably gonna have to end up getting a new camera. But for now it's working, but I have an autofocus issue, so sorry about that. But as you can see, this is working. So let's get it back in the machine and get that going and see how that turns out. Alright, so we are ready to go. I've got the board reinstalled just temporarily, just a couple screws to hold it in place. Everything is back connected and ready to go. Soundboard is reinstalled. The two fuses that were blown were these two bottom fuses there. There's 4 fuses. 1, 2, 3, 4. The bottom 2 were blown. Don't know why, but they've been replaced. Everything's hooked up. Our voltages are good for -5, 12, and +5. I, of course, am not going to power up this monitor that was in a fire. I have no idea if it works. I'm going to take it out, clean it, and do the rebuild process later. So for now, we're using this one that's already been cleaned and rebuilt and ready to go. So A, let's turn it on, see if it even works. B, do we have good sound and audio? And C, are my guns working? So let's cross our fingers. I have not tried it yet. Let's turn this on. Yes! We get our test tone, and we have our LEDs, both LEDs on the gun board, LED on the soundboard. Main board is working, and we have an image. Outstanding. So I'm going to speed this up here if I'm able to. We'll get through all this here. Okay, and we're hoping to see good sound software version, release 1. Oh, my monitor's got a cold solder joint. Ugh, come on. Really? Well, we know it's working. The monitor has a cold solder joint I gotta fix. But what we're interested in is... Yes! Let's go! Awesome! Do we have the feedback? Yes! This one's a little bit weaker, but CDs?
The revolution has begun! Generation X is in effect!
I think we're good to go, everybody. Oh, marquee's not working. Well, let me fix that. Let me fix that real quick. Hopefully I can. But yes, we have controls. My monitor has a cold solder joint. If I turn it off and back on, it works. Let me work on the marquee real quick and see if I can get that working. Well, after a new bulb and a new starter, it's good to go. So I think we are ready to begin the full restoration process now that everything is verified working. I'm just so happy that the soundboard is working. I have new caps on the way to recap the soundboard.
Let's go!
And monitor still working. Okay, yeah, I got to figure out why there's a cold solder joint. It shuts off every so often. Must have missed something on the rebuild, but anyway, yeah. So I think we are 100% operational. I can't wait to get this going and see how it turns out. So stay tuned, and I appreciate it. And we'll see how the project evolves. No, I forgot to mention, I don't think I showed it, but of course I put a new plug on the end here, so yeah. And I got to get all this stuff remounted in here. It's just being held down by these 2 screws very loosely. The rest of the screws are down right there, so I'm going to get this all put back together and cleaned up, and this monitor out, and this monitor fixed with the cold solder joint, and get in there and get this cleaned up. Anyway, you know, so stay tuned. This will be quite the fun adventure.